857 fires, 725 of them completely out of control. A country pushed to level 4, its second highest emergency status on record. And officially, on paper, according to the government's own numbers, this is a below-average year. Read that again because it should not make sense to you. If 857 fires and a national emergency status is what below average looks like in Canada right now, then somewhere in these numbers is a question nobody in the mainstream coverage is actually answering. What happens if this stops being below average? By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why the official statistics and the reality on the ground are telling two completely different stories, and which one you should actually be worried about. I've verified every number in this video against government and satellite data, so if that's the kind of reporting you want more of, subscribe before we go further. Let's start with the number that gets thrown around the most, and the one that's the most misleading on its own: total fire count. As of this week, Canada has recorded roughly 3,137 individual wildfires so far this year, which together have burned through approximately 1.4 million hectares of land. That's already a landmass bigger than the entire country of Jamaica, gone. On its own, that number sounds catastrophic. But here's where it gets interesting. This time last year, in 2025, Canada had actually recorded fewer fires, about 2,913 of them. And yet those fires had already burned through roughly 4.6 million hectares, more than 3 times the total area burned so far this year. Read that again. Fewer fires, 3 times more land destroyed. That single comparison tells you almost everything about why raw fire counts lie to you, and why area burned is the number professionals actually track. A season can rack up thousands of small, contained fires and still do less damage than a season with a handful of massive, fast-moving ones. Right now, 2026 has more fires than last year, but far less total destruction, which is exactly why officials are calling this a below-average season, even while it's actively making headlines around the world. Keep that contradiction in your head, because I'm about to show you why it doesn't mean what most people assume it means. Here's the number that should actually stop you: 725. That's how many of Canada's active fires are currently classified out of control, meaning firefighting agencies expect them to keep growing, not shrinking. Combine that with a fire season that's officially below average, and you get a genuinely uncomfortable picture. If a quieter than normal year already looks like this, the real risk isn't what's already happened. It's what happens if the weather turns. And Canada's own government forecasters are already warning that above average heat is expected to continue straight through August, with the driest conditions concentrated over Manitoba and northwestern Ontario, 2 regions already under serious strain. In other words, the ingredients for this to escalate are already sitting on the table. Nobody is saying it will get dramatically worse, but nobody credible is ruling it out either. Now let's talk about what actually pulled this story into the international spotlight this month, because it wasn't a number in a government report. It was the sky over Canada's biggest city turning a genuine shade of orange. On July 15th, smoke from more than 100 active fires burning in remote northwestern Ontario rolled south into Toronto, a city of roughly 3 million people. Within hours, according to the global tracking service IQ Air, Toronto had the single worst air quality of any major city on the entire planet, worse than cities that deal with chronic, year-round pollution like Delhi and Doha. The city canceled outdoor children's programs, shut public pools, and Environment Canada issued its most severe air quality alert level, warning that the smoke was dangerous for everyone outside, regardless of age or health. The next day, Toronto's ranking only dropped to 3rd worst in the world. The day after that, 4th. On the morning of July 17th, air quality briefly improved to good by mid-morning, only for officials to warn it would swing straight back to very poor again by evening. That back and forth, healthy 1 hour, hazardous the next, is exactly the kind of instability that makes this smoke so hard for residents to plan around, and it didn't stop at Toronto. By that same week, Winnipeg was placed under its own air quality warning as the smoke plume shifted, and nearly 200 separate wildfires were burning across Quebec alone, serious enough that the province expanded its provincial fire ban. This wasn't a single bad day in one city. It was a rolling multi-province smoke event that just kept finding new places to land. And it didn't stop at the Canadian border either. That same smoke plume drifted straight across into the United States, pushing air quality warnings into major cities across the Midwest and Northeast, with meteorologists warning that millions more Americans could see unhealthy air in the days that followed. If you've ever wondered how a fire burning in a forest most people will never set foot in can end up affecting the air you personally breathe hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away, here's the actual mechanism. Once wildfire smoke rises high enough into the atmosphere, it gets caught by upper-level wind currents that don't recognize borders, provinces, or coastlines. Fine smoke particles can ride those winds for days, crossing entire countries, and in past fire seasons, they've made it all the way across the Atlantic into Europe. The fire itself stays exactly where it started. The smoke does not. This is a good moment to talk about who's actually paying the highest price in this story, because it's not the people posting hazy skyline photos online. Fire officials have confirmed roughly 148 active wildland fires burning across northwestern Ontario alone, a remote stretch of boreal forest with almost no roads and even fewer towns. Several of those fires forced evacuation orders for First Nations communities in the region, many of which have no road access whatsoever and depend entirely on aircraft to get people out when a fire closes in. As of the most recent count, 21 First Nations communities across the country have been affected by wildfires this season. 13 of them have been formally evacuated. Roughly 2,182 people are currently displaced from their homes because of it. Ontario alone accounts for the largest share, with 7 of its First Nations communities among those evacuated. Sit with that gap for a second. For most people in Toronto or Chicago, this disaster looks like a smell in the air and a phone notification telling them to stay inside for a day or two. For a much smaller number of communities sitting directly in these fires' path, it looks like an emergency flight out, with no idea whether their home will still be standing when they're allowed back. Same wildfire season, 2 completely different experiences of it. There's also a piece of this story that rarely makes the headlines, and it's arguably just as important: flooding. While one side of the country is dealing with smoke and evacuation orders, Manitoba's Parkland region has simultaneously been hit by intense storms and heavy rainfall, serious enough that the federal government approved emergency flooding assistance for the province earlier this month. Some of the exact same provinces fighting wildfires right now are also managing a completely separate flooding emergency at the same time. That's not a coincidence worth glossing over. It's a reminder that a genuinely difficult season for a country this size rarely shows up as just one type of disaster. Now let's get into why this smoke is actually dangerous, because most people fundamentally misunderstand it. The specific threat in wildfire smoke is something called fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5, particles roughly 1/30th the width of a human hair. Your nose and throat are built to filter out bigger dust and debris, but particles this small slip straight past those defenses, travel deep into your lungs, and pass directly into your bloodstream. That's the difference between smoke being an inconvenience and smoke being an actual medical event. Short-term exposure can trigger asthma attacks, throat and eye irritation, and headaches. For people with existing heart or lung conditions, it can push their bodies past a genuinely dangerous threshold, and hospitals have repeatedly documented measurable spikes in emergency visits in the days right after a heavy smoke event like this one. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. Research suggests wildfire smoke may actually cause more harm per particle than the everyday pollution most city dwellers are already used to breathing from traffic and industry. Some studies tracking hospital admissions have found respiratory cases climbing by as much as 10% for every additional increase in wildfire-specific particulate matter, a steeper jump than the same amount of ordinary urban pollution tends to cause. And no, if you can't smell smoke, that doesn't mean the air is safe. The most dangerous particles don't always announce themselves through your nose, which is exactly why health agencies keep pushing people to check an actual air quality index, rather than trust their own senses. Here's a complication almost nobody talks about, and it's genuinely one of the hardest parts of this entire situation. During a heat wave on its own, the standard advice is to open your windows at night so air can circulate and your home can cool down. During a smoke event on its own, the advice is the exact opposite. Seal your windows, keep the smoke out, run your AC on recirculate. Now imagine both hitting at once, which is exactly what happened in Toronto, where a heat warning pushed temperatures to 33 degrees Celsius, feeling closer to 36 degrees Celsius with humidity. On the very same days, the smoke rolled in. If you don't have reliable air conditioning, you're suddenly stuck choosing between a stifling sealed apartment or an open window that lets toxic air pour in. There's no clean answer here, which is exactly why cities affected by this overlap have opened cooling centers specifically designed to offer relief from both hazards at once: filtered, air-conditioned indoor space for residents who don't have adequate protection at home. This exact combination, extreme heat arriving at the same time as heavy wildfire smoke, has become an increasingly regular feature of Canadian and American summers rather than a rare coincidence, and that trend alone is worth paying attention to. Before we wrap up, it's worth addressing something directly, because it comes up every single time a wildfire season gets this much attention. Claims that these fires were deliberately set, sometimes framed as coordinated arson, occasionally framed around stranger theories involving directed energy weapons. Individual arson cases do happen and are a documented real phenomenon in isolated incidents. But a continent-scale wildfire season involving hundreds of simultaneous fires spread across thousands of kilometers of largely roadless northern forest simply isn't something any individual or small group could physically produce. The real drivers are lightning strikes hitting bone-dry fuel built up over a hot, dry stretch of weather, combined with strong, shifting winds, ordinary, well-understood fire physics operating at a massive scale. It's a genuinely difficult thing to picture if you've never personally seen how fast dry vegetation can catch and spread. And that gap between lived experience and the physical reality of a boreal forest fire season is exactly why alternative explanations tend to fill the space. But the documented, verified cause here is already more than sufficient to explain everything we're seeing. So where does this actually leave things? Canada is currently managing a wildfire season that is, by the primary scientific measurement of total area burned, technically running below average. And yet that same below average season has already produced the worst air quality reading of any major city on the planet, triggered a level 4 national emergency status, pushed thousands of people out of their homes across multiple provinces, and sent smoke across an international border into major American cities, all within the same few weeks. Government forecasters are explicitly warning that hotter, drier conditions are expected to continue through August, especially across Manitoba, northwestern Ontario, and much of western Canada. Nobody studying this data is claiming the season is guaranteed to reach the extraordinary scale of 2023 or 2025, but 2 record or near-record seasons happening within a 3-year window is exactly the pattern behind why officials are treating this year's numbers with caution rather than relief. The real question isn't whether this season has already been bad, it's how fast a below-average year can flip into something far more serious once sustained heat and dryness fully take hold. And based on what forecasters are watching right now, that window is still wide open. If you want to keep following this story with verified numbers instead of noise, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next few weeks are very likely going to decide which direction this season actually goes.